The Force binds all things across the galaxy, connecting every living being in an invisible web of light and shadow. But on Mandalore, in the heart of Sundari's royal palace, something stirred that had no place in the natural order. The dark side had grown thick here, a miasma of rage and ambition that emanated from the Zabrak Sith Lord who now ruled this warrior world through fear and cunning. Darth Maul sat upon his stolen throne, savoring his victory over the fool Previsla, when the air above him began to tear. It started as a whisper, a sound that shouldn't exist, like fabric ripping across dimensions. The throne room's windows rattled in their frames. Maul rose, his yellow eyes narrowing as his hand instinctively moved toward his lightsaber. The dark side screamed a warning, but it came too late. Reality split open like a wound. And through that crimson rift came something that had traveled far beyond the boundaries of known space. The symbiote fell like liquid hate made manifest, a writhing mass of red and black that defied the laws of biology and physics alike. It had drifted through the cosmic void for time immeasurable, drawn by the psychic screams of rage and hatred that leaked from this strange galaxy. And here, in this place saturated with dark side energy, it had found the strongest beacon, a mind burning with fury, ambition, and the delicious taste of fresh conquest. Maul unleashed a wave of Force energy, attempting to repel the alien substance. The attack should have obliterated any living creature. Instead, the symbiote absorbed the dark side power like a sponge drinking water, growing larger, hungrier. It lunged with impossible speed, tendrils shooting across the throne room faster than even a Sith Lord could dodge. The first tendril wrapped around Maul's cybernetic leg, and the Zabrak snarled, igniting his double-bladed lightsaber in a crimson arc. The plasma blade cut through symbiote matter, but the severed piece simply rejoined the mass, regenerating instantly. More tendrils came, and Maul realized with cold dread that this was not a battle he could win with conventional weapons. "What are you?" he hissed, backing toward the throne room's exit. But the symbiote had already surrounded him, cutting off escape. In the entity's primordial consciousness, there was no language, no complex thought, only hunger, violence, and the recognition of a perfect host. This being radiated power unlike anything the symbiote had encountered. Not technological, not mutant, but something ancient and primal that resonated with the symbiote's own nature. Maul attempted to call upon the Force, to crush the creature's alien cells, to project his will and dominate its simple mind. This was his fatal mistake. The moment he opened himself to assert control, the symbiote poured into that opening like a flood through a broken dam. It flowed across his skin, seeping into pores, bonding with flesh, and driving tendrils deep into his nervous system. The Sith Lord's scream echoed through the palace, a sound of rage, violation, and dawning horror as something foreign invaded his consciousness. His Death Watch guards burst through the doors, weapons raised, only to freeze at the sight before them. Their master convulsed in the center of the throne room, his body encased in a writhing shell of crimson organic matter that pulsed with its own heartbeat. Maul's yellow eyes blazed through the forming mask. His mouth opened in a soundless roar as two consciousnesses collided within a single body. The symbiote sought to consume, to dominate, to transform this host into an instrument of pure carnage. But Darth Maul was no ordinary prey. His mind, tempered by Sith training and years of suffering, pushed back with fury that matched the symbiote's hunger. For a moment, there was equilibrium. Two monsters locked in internal battle for control of a body that now belonged to neither and both. Then something shifted. The symbiote felt the dark side flowing through its new host, tasted the delicious hatred and rage that permeated every cell, and instead of consuming Maul's consciousness entirely, it merged with it. The fusion was imperfect, chaotic, but devastating in its power. The being that rose from the throne room floor was no longer simply Darth Maul, nor was it merely the Carnage symbiote. It was something new, a hybrid of Sith ambition and symbiotic chaos, wrapped in a body that rippled with red and black organic armor. Where Maul's tattoos had been, now crimson tendrils writhed beneath translucent skin. His cybernetic legs were encased in symbiote matter that moved like living metal. The entity turned its gaze upon the Death Watch guards, and in that moment, they saw something that even warriors bred for violence could not comprehend. This was not their master. This was not even recognizably alive in any way they understood. It smiled, and its teeth were far too sharp, far too many. If you want to see more dark crossovers enter the Star Wars galaxy, hit that subscribe button and drop the name of a character you'd want to see in the comments below. May the Force be with you. The guards raised their blasters, but they never got the chance to fire. The first guard died before his finger reached the trigger. A crimson blade, not of plasma, but of hardened symbiote matter, erupted from the entity's arm and impaled him through the chest plate. The Beskar held for a fraction of a second before the blade's point found the gap between plates, driving through with surgical precision that spoke of Maul's combat experience guided by the symbiote's adaptable biology. The other guards opened fire, blaster bolts screaming across the throne room in a desperate barrage. The entity moved with fluid grace that defied prediction, each motion flowing into the next as if it knew where the bolts would strike before they were fired. It did know. Maul's force sensitivity combined with the symbiote's enhanced reflexes created something that existed between thought and action, instinct and precognition. Where the entity couldn't dodge, it didn't need to. Symbiote matter rippled and hardened into crimson shields that absorbed the energy blasts, dissipating the heat across its surface like water across stone. The guards had trained to fight Jedi, to predict and counter Force users with coordinated fire patterns. But their enemies' movements held no pattern, no fighting form recognizable to their tactical training. A tendril shot out from the entity's shoulder, wrapping around a guard's throat and lifting him off his feet. The Mandalorian clawed at the organic rope, but it constricted with inexorable strength. His helmet's speakers transmitted wet choking sounds before the tendril whipped sideways, slamming him into the durasteel wall hard enough to leave a dent in both the metal and the armor. Inside the fusion, two wills wrestled for dominance. Maul's consciousness screamed for control, for calculated violence rather than this mindless slaughter. The symbiote responded with pure sensation, the ecstasy of violence, the pleasure of causing pain, the intoxicating rush of fear pouring from the dying guards. It tried to show Maul that this was better than any Sith philosophy, better than revenge or ambition. This was purpose distilled to its purest form. But Maul's mind was too strong to fully submit, too disciplined to drown completely. He seized upon the symbiote's combat instincts and bent them toward his own tactical genius. When the next guard fired, the entity didn't just dodge. It calculated angles, predicted backup positions, and moved with deadly purpose rather than chaotic frenzy. The hybrid leaped, symbiote matter forming additional limbs mid-flight that caught the throne room's pillars, propelling it forward with momentum impossible for any organic being. It landed behind three guards who had tried to establish a defensive formation. Maul's lightsaber ignited in its hand, but the weapon had changed. The crimson blades now flickered with an unstable quality as symbiote matter writhed around the hilt, reinforcing Maul's grip with organic muscle. The lightsaber whirled in a devastating arc, and the guards fell. Not clean deaths. The symbiote wouldn't allow that. Each strike was calculated to maim first, to hear the screams, to taste the fear before the killing blow. Maul felt revulsion at the unnecessary cruelty, but he also felt something darker, a recognition that this power, this fusion, made him stronger than he had ever been alone. Gar Saxon, leader of Maul's Death Watch forces, burst into the throne room with 24 warriors behind him. They had heard the commotion, expected a Jedi strike team, or perhaps Bo-Katan's resistance. Instead, they found a charnel house painted in blood and scorch marks, and at its center stood something wearing their master's face like a mask. "Lord Maul?" Saxon's voice carried uncertainty beneath its trained authority. His helmet's sensors couldn't make sense of what they were detecting. The biosignature was wrong, too large, too chaotic, reading as multiple life forms occupying the same space. The entity's head swiveled toward Saxon with a motion too smooth, too fluid. When it spoke, the voice held harmonics that didn't belong to any single throat. Maul's distinctive tone underlaid with a hissing, multi-layered quality that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. Saxon. The words stretched out, tasted, savored. Gather the Death Watch. Seal the palace. No one leaves Sundari tonight. Saxon hesitated. Years of military discipline warred with every instinct screaming that this was not his commander, that whatever stood before him wearing crimson organic armor was something fundamentally wrong. But he had sworn loyalty to Maul, had followed him in overthrowing Vizsla, had helped establish their grip on Mandalore's underworld. "My lord, what happened to you?" The entity smiled, and Saxon took an involuntary step backward. Those weren't Maul's teeth, too many, too sharp, arranged in rows like some deep ocean predator. "I have evolved," the hybrid said, and for a moment Maul's consciousness surged forward, asserting control over the words. "An opportunity has presented itself. Power beyond the dark side. I will use it to crush our enemies and secure Mandalore under our absolute control." That sounded more like the Maul that Saxon knew. Ambitious, power-hungry, strategic. The Death Watch commander nodded slowly, though his hand never left his blaster. "What are your orders?" Deep within the fusion, Maul and the symbiote reached a temporary detente. Maul needed the symbiote's power, its regeneration, its adaptability. The symbiote craved the force sensitivity, the tactical intelligence, the access to an entire planet of potential prey. They would work together, for now. But in the darkest corners of the merged consciousness, both entities harbored the same thought. Eventually, only one could remain dominant. The palace corridors echoed with the synchronized footsteps of Death Watch warriors as they moved to execute their transformed master's commands. Saxon had dispatched squads to every exit, every landing platform, every possible escape route from the royal sector. Sundari's citizens would wake to find themselves trapped, though they didn't yet know why. In the throne room, the entity that was both Maul and Carnage paced with predatory restlessness, its form constantly shifting as symbiote matter rippled beneath the surface. Rook Kast entered the chamber, her crimson armor marking her as one of Maul's most trusted lieutenants. She had seen horrors during the Clone Wars, had witnessed Jedi cut down entire squads, had watched Pre Vizsla die on this very floor. But nothing had prepared her for the sight of her master's transformation. The organic armor moved with unsettling independence, tendrils occasionally extending and retracting as if tasting the air. "The criminal syndicates are demanding an audience," Kast reported, her voice steady despite the instinctive fear clawing at her composure. "The Pikes, the Hutt's representatives, Black Sun, they want to know why their operations are being locked down." The hybrid turned toward her, and Kast saw something flicker across its features. Maul's tactical mind asserting itself through the symbiote's chaotic hunger. Bring them to the throne room. All of them. It's time they understood the new order. Within the fusion, Maul's consciousness wrestled with strategy. The Criminal Alliance had been essential to conquering Mandalore, but they were also potential threats. Too independent, too ambitious. The symbiote offered a solution that Maul's Sith pragmatism found darkly appealing. Why maintain alliances through negotiation when domination could be absolute? An hour later, the throne room filled with the galaxy's most dangerous criminals. Zeton Moj of Black Sun arrived with his bodyguards, their weapons poorly concealed. Fife, representing the Pike Syndicate, remained near the doors, clearly prepared for quick escape. The Hutt representative, a corpulent major domo named Oruba, settled his massive bulk on a repulsor platform with visible discomfort. Maul, or what had been Maul, sat upon his throne, the symbiote armor making his already imposing figure seem even larger, more alien. The organic matter had spread, forming a cape of writhing tendrils that moved with serpentine grace. His eyes, once simply yellow with Sith corruption, now held an additional quality, a hunger that transcended mere ambition. "You summoned us, Lord Maul," Zaiton Moj began, his tone carefully neutral. "Your forces have disrupted spice shipments, frozen credit transfers, and sealed our escape routes. We agreed to partnership, not imprisonment." "Partnership," the hybrid repeated, the word tasting wrong in its multi-layered voice. "Yes. We had an arrangement. You provided resources, I provided protection and authority. But arrangements can be renegotiated." The symbiote's influence pushed forward, craving the fear radiating from these assembled criminals. It wanted to strike, to show them what real power looked like, to paint the throne room in their blood and terror. But Maul's discipline held it back. Barely. These criminals were useful. Their networks, their resources, their connections across the galaxy, all valuable assets. "We are not your servants, Zabrak," Fife hissed, his breathing apparatus creating additional emphasis. "The Pikes answer to no one. If you think—" The entity moved faster than any of them could track. One moment it was seated on the throne, the next it stood directly before Fife, a blade of hardened symbiote matter pressed against the Pike's throat. The bodyguards reached for weapons, but tendrils erupted from the hybrid's back, wrapping around their arms with crushing force. "I think," the entity whispered, its face mere centimeters from Fife's, "that you misunderstand our relationship. You are not my partners. You are not my allies. You are tools, and tools that forget their purpose become useless." Inside the mental battleground, Maul felt the symbiote's bloodlust surging like a tidal wave. It wanted to kill them all, to feast on their fear and pain, to demonstrate dominance through wholesale slaughter. But Maul knew that path led to strategic disaster. Dead criminals couldn't maintain supply lines, couldn't provide intelligence, couldn't serve his ultimate goal of building an empire to rival Sidious himself. He pushed back against the symbiote's instincts, asserting his will with the full weight of his Sith training. The entity shuddered, its form rippling as two consciousnesses warred for control. The blade at Fife's throat pressed harder, drawing a thin line of blue blood, then slowly withdrew. "However," the hybrid continued, its voice regaining some of Maul's calculated tone, "effective tools are rewarded. Continue your operations. Maintain the supply lines. In exchange, Mandalore's protection extends to your interests. Any who move against you, move against me." The symbiote raged against this mercy, but Maul held firm. Not yet. The time for unleashing complete carnage would come. But first, he needed to secure his power base. The galaxy would learn to fear this new form, but fear was most effective when applied strategically. Zaiton Moj exchanged glances with the other crime lords. Something had clearly changed about their partner, something fundamentally disturbing. But the offer stood: protection in exchange for continued service. In the criminal underworld, such arrangements were the currency of survival. "We accept your generous terms, Lord Maul," Oruba wheezed through his translator. "The syndicates will continue our operations as agreed." The hybrid smiled. And this time it was purely Maul's expression. Cold, calculating, satisfied. "Excellent. You may leave. Saxon will ensure your safe passage from the palace." As the criminals filed out, casting nervous glances at their transformed host, Rook Kast approached the throne. "My lord, that restraint. I've never seen you show mercy to those who challenged you." The entity's eyes focused on her, and in their depths, she saw the truth. This wasn't mercy. This was patience. The predator allowing prey to fatten before the inevitable hunt. "Restraint is weakness," the symbiote's influence hissed through Maul's words. "But timing is everything." Bo-Katan cries watched the palace from her hidden position atop a residential tower in Sundari's outer districts. Through her helmet's enhanced optics, she tracked Death Watch patrols moving with unusual urgency, their formations tighter than normal, their weapons constantly ready. Something had changed in the hours since she'd last observed Maul's operations. The air itself felt wrong, charged with an electric tension that set her combat instincts screaming. Behind her, a dozen loyal Mandalorians waited in silence. These were warriors who had rejected Maul's rule, who remembered when Mandalore stood proud under Duchess Satine's leadership before Death Watch's coup. They had been planning a strike against the usurper for weeks, waiting for the perfect moment to reclaim their world. "The palace is locked down," reported Ursa Wren, her armor painted in the colors of Clan Wren. "Every entrance sealed, double patrols on the walls. Whatever happened, it has Maul paranoid." "Paranoid means vulnerable," Bo-Katan replied, though something in her gut contradicted the words. She had fought alongside her sister, had witnessed the horrors of the Clone Wars, had even briefly served under Maul when she thought Death Watch's cause justified any alliance. She knew fear when she saw it, and those Death Watch warriors weren't moving with the confidence of victors. They moved like men guarding against something they didn't understand. Her comlink crackled with an encrypted signal, one of her informants still embedded within the palace guard. The voice that came through was tight with barely controlled panic. "Bo-Katan, you need to abort whatever you're planning. Maul..." "He's changed. I don't know how else to explain it. Something happened in the throne room. The guards who went in didn't come out. Saxon's keeping it quiet. But I saw Maul afterward. And he's..." The voice broke off, replaced by harsh breathing. "He's not right. His body is covered in some kind of living armor. It moves on its own. By the Manda, I've never seen anything like it." Bo-Katan's jaw tightened. "Sith alchemy? Some new dark side technique?" "I don't think so. This isn't the Force. It's something else, something alien." The crime lords left the palace looking terrified. And those are beings who negotiate with Hutts and Black Sun without flinching. Whatever Maul has become, it scared them into submission without a shot fired. The transmission ended abruptly, and Bo-Katan was left staring at the palace's illuminated towers. Her mind raced through possibilities: superweapons, experimental technology, some separatist bioweapon. None of it fit the description. Living armor that moved independently? That sounded like the fever dreams of someone exposed to toxic gases, not intelligence she could act upon. "We should investigate before we strike," Ursa suggested, reading her commander's hesitation. "If Maul has acquired some new weapon, we need to understand it before we commit our forces." Bo-Katan nodded slowly. "Take a scout team, 3 warriors, stealth approach. I want eyes inside that palace within the hour. Find out what we're dealing with." As Ursa moved to assemble the team, Bo-Katan couldn't shake the feeling that they were already too late, that whatever had happened to Maul had fundamentally altered the balance of power on Mandalore. She thought of her sister Satine, murdered by the Zabrak's hand, and felt the familiar burn of vengeance in her chest. Whatever Maul had become, whatever new horror he'd unleashed, she would end him. For Satine, for Mandalore. She just hoped the cost wouldn't be more than they could afford to pay. Deep within the palace vaults, past layers of security that had once protected Pre Vizsla's most precious artifacts, the hybrid entity prowled through chambers filled with Mandalorian history. Ancient weapons lined the walls, Beskars and Crush Gaunts, war hammers forged from Beskar, even a few archaic flame projectors from the Mandalorian Excision era. Maul's consciousness directed the search, his memory recalling intelligence gathered during his conquest. Somewhere in these vaults lay weapons that could threaten even Force users, tools the ancient Mandalorians had designed specifically for their wars against the Jedi. He needed to understand what arsenal Bo-Katan might access in her inevitable counterattack. The symbiote, however, was focused on something else entirely. It could sense life throughout the palace, warm bodies pulsing with blood and fear, thousands of potential hosts waiting to be claimed. The temptation was overwhelming, a siren call to spread, to reproduce, to create an army of bonded warriors that could sweep across this planet like a crimson plague. No, Maul's will pushed back, his Sith discipline creating mental barriers against the symbiote's instincts. We are not a mindless infection. We are calculated power. We are strategic dominance. The symbiote recoiled from the force of Maul's assertion, but it planted a seed of thought in their shared consciousness. Why stop at one host? Why limit this power to a single body when it could spread across entire armies? Maul felt the idea take root despite his resistance. An army of Death Watch warriors enhanced with symbiote abilities, loyal only to him, unable to question or betray. He physically shook his head, tendrils writhing in agitation. That path led to losing control entirely. The symbiote would use such an opportunity to assert dominance, to transform from tool into master. No, better to maintain this singular fusion, to keep the power concentrated and controllable. A sound echoed from above, the distinctive hum of jetpacks activating. Maul's force senses expanded, detecting 3 life signatures approaching the palace from an unexpected vector. Bo-Katan's scouts, no doubt, attempting infiltration while his forces focused on ground-level security. The symbiote surged with anticipation, hunger sharpening into focus, fresh prey, new victims to terrorize, the chance to demonstrate what they had become. For once, Maul didn't disagree. Let Bo-Katan's warriors see what awaited them. Let them carry tales of horror back to their resistance. Fear was a weapon sharper than any blade, and it was time Mandalore learned exactly what now ruled from Sundari's throne. The hybrid moved through the palace with predatory grace, ascending toward the landing platforms where the scouts would breach. In the darkness, crimson eyes gleamed with anticipation, and a smile spread across features that were no longer entirely Zabrak. The hunt had begun. The 3 Mandalorian scouts dropped onto the palace's eastern landing platform with practiced silence, their jetpacks cutting out the moment their boots touched Durasteel. Ursa Wren led the team, flanked by 2 night owls whose armor bore the scorch marks of a dozen battles. They moved in perfect coordination, weapons sweeping corners as they advanced toward the maintenance entrance. The platform should have been guarded. Saxon's paranoia should have placed sentries at every access point. Instead, they found only empty space and the low hum of the palace's life support systems. Ursa signaled her team to halt, every combat instinct screaming that this was wrong. Empty wasn't the same as undefended. It meant someone wanted them to enter. "Command, we've reached the insertion point," she whispered into her encrypted comm. "No resistance." "Proceeding with infiltration." Bo-Katan's voice crackled back. "Stay sharp. If it's a trap, pull out immediately." The maintenance corridor stretched before them, dimly lit by emergency lighting that cast everything in shades of red and shadow. The Mandalorians advanced in standard sweep formation, their sensors detecting no life signs, no movement, no energy signatures beyond the palace's basic functions. It was as if the entire eastern wing had been evacuated. Then Ursa saw it. Dark stains on the corridor walls, irregular patterns that her helmet's analysis identified as blood. Not fresh, but recent. Hours old at most. The patterns were wrong, too chaotic for blaster wounds, too widespread for melee combat. It looked like something had painted the walls with deliberate violence. "Blood trails," she reported quietly. "Multiple sources." "Whatever happened here, it was messy." One of the night owls knelt beside a larger stain, his gloved hand hovering over the surface. "This is Death Watch armor residue. They were wearing full kit when they died. What could do this to armored warriors?" The answer came from above. The entity dropped from the ceiling where it had been clinging with symbiote adhesion, landing between the scouts with enough force to crack the Durasteel floor. The Mandalorians spun, weapons rising, but they froze at the sight before them. This was Maul. They recognized the horned head, the yellow eyes, the distinctive tattoos. But everything else was wrong. His body was encased in living crimson armor that writhed and pulsed, tendrils extending from his shoulders like serpents tasting the air. "Bo-Katan sends children to face me!" The hybrid's multi-layered voice echoed through the corridor. How disappointing. Ursa fired first, her blaster rifle spitting coherent energy at point-blank range. The hybrid didn't dodge. It didn't need to. Symbiote matter hardened into a shield across its chest, absorbing the bolts with barely a ripple. The other two Mandalorians opened fire, creating a coordinated crossfire that should have overwhelmed any single target. Instead, the entity moved through the barrage like liquid death. It flowed between shots with impossible grace. Maul's force precognition combined with the symbiote's adaptive reflexes, creating something that existed beyond normal combat physics. A tendril lashed out, wrapping around one night owl's rifle and crushing it like tin. Another tendril caught the warrior's leg, yanking him off balance. The Mandalorian triggered his flamethrower at point-blank range, desperate to drive the creature back. Fire erupted across the corridor, engulfing the hybrid in cleansing flame. For a moment, the entity recoiled, the symbiote's instinctive fear of heat warring with Maul's pain tolerance and force-enhanced durability. Inside the fusion, the symbiote screamed in agony, demanding retreat. But Maul's consciousness seized control, forcing the organic matter to endure, to adapt, to overcome. The pain was intense but manageable, and pain was something the former Sith apprentice understood intimately. He had survived being bisected, had endured years of madness on Lotho Minor. This was nothing compared to that suffering. The flames died as the Mandalorian's fuel reserves emptied, and the hybrid emerged from the inferno with its organic armor scorched but regenerating. New tissue grew across burned sections, the symbiote's healing factor working in overdrive, fueled by the dark side energy flowing through Maul's force-sensitive cells. "Fire!" the entity hissed, tendrils striking like a viper and piercing through the night owl's armor at the joint between chest plate and shoulder. Clever, but insufficient. Ursa watched her warrior fall and made a tactical decision born of years commanding special operations. They couldn't win this fight. The mission was intelligence gathering, and they had gathered all they needed. Maul had become something that conventional weapons couldn't stop. She grabbed her remaining teammate and triggered both their jetpacks simultaneously, rocketing backward toward the landing platform. The hybrid lunged forward, tendrils extending with frightening speed, but the Mandalorians were already airborne, accelerating toward the platform's edge. Ursa armed a thermal detonator and threw it behind them, the explosive creating a barrier of flame and shrapnel that bought them precious seconds. They cleared the platform and dove toward Sundry's cityscape, jetpacks screaming at maximum thrust. Behind them, they heard a sound that would haunt their nightmares. Laughter that held too many voices, too much hunger, echoing across the night air. On the platform's edge, the hybrid watched them flee with satisfaction that was purely Maul's. Let them run. Let them report what they had seen. Let Bo-Katan understand that her resistance faced not merely a Sith Lord, but something far worse. The wounded night owl lay gasping in the corridor, his armor's life support struggling to keep him alive. The entity approached slowly, savoring the fear radiating from the dying warrior. The symbiote wanted to consume him, to add his biomass to their own, to taste his final moments. But Maul had a different purpose. He knelt beside the Mandalorian, placing one hand on his helmet. Through the Force, he sent images, visions of what Sundari would become, glimpses of the carnage awaiting those who resisted. Then, with uncharacteristic mercy, he crushed the warrior's throat quickly, ending his suffering before the symbiote could demand otherwise. Inside their shared consciousness, the symbiote raged at being denied its prey. But Maul understood something the creature did not. A survivor who died quickly was just a casualty. A survivor who lived long enough to share his terror was a messenger. And Maul needed Bo-Katan to receive the message clearly. Mandalore belonged to a new kind of monster now, and resistance would only feed its hunger. The Jedi Temple on Coruscant hummed with its usual controlled chaos. Younglings training in the courtyard, Knights debating philosophy in the archives, masters meditating in the sacred spires. But in the council chamber, Obi-Wan Kenobi stood before the assembled masters with news that had already sent ripples of concern through the Force. "Mandalore has gone dark," he reported, his hands clasped behind his back in a posture that spoke of military bearing earned through years of war. "All communications from Sundari ceased approximately 18 hours ago. Republic intelligence detected unusual energy signatures before the blackout, something they couldn't identify." Mace Windu leaned forward, his expression grave. "Maul's work? Possibly, though the pattern doesn't match previous Sith activities. The Duchess's last transmission mentioned resistance forces preparing to move against Maul's occupation." Obi-Wan's jaw tightened at the memory of Satine, at the failure to save her from Maul's blade. "I believe we can no longer ignore the situation. Mandalore's strategic position makes it too valuable to abandon to Sith control." Yoda's ears drooped slightly, his ancient eyes closing in contemplation. "Sense something else, do you, Master Kenobi? More than simple conquest?" Obi-Wan hesitated. He did sense something. A disturbance in the Force unlike anything he'd encountered. Not the calculated malevolence of Dooku or the overwhelming darkness of Sidious, but something chaotic, primal, hungry. It made his skin crawl in a way that pure dark-side corruption never had. "I sense wrongness," he admitted. "As if something has torn through the fabric of the Force itself. It's difficult to explain, Masters. The disturbance feels alien, outside our normal understanding of light and dark." The council members exchanged glances. The Clone Wars had stretched the Jedi thin, forced them to become generals rather than peacekeepers, exposed them to horrors they'd never anticipated. But this was something new, and new threats during wartime rarely ended well. "You have history with Maul," Mace stated. "The Council grants you permission to investigate Mandalore. Take a small team. This is reconnaissance, not invasion. We cannot afford another front in this war." Obi-Wan bowed. "I understand, Master Windu. I'll depart within the hour." As he left the council chamber, Anakin Skywalker fell into step beside him, his prosthetic hand flexing with barely contained energy. "You're going after Maul? Master, let me come with you. After everything he did to you, to Duchess Satine?" "Which is precisely why you should remain on Coruscant," Obi-Wan interrupted gently. "Your emotions regarding Maul are too raw, Anakin. I need clear heads for this mission, not revenge-driven heroics." Anakin's jaw clenched, but he nodded reluctantly. "Just be careful. I've got a bad feeling about this." "As do I, old friend. As do I." Bo-Katan's safe house shook as Ursa Wren slammed her fist against the strategy table, her helmet removed to reveal features tight with fury and fear. "We can't fight that thing. Did you hear me, Bo-Katan? Our weapons barely slowed it down. It moved through blaster fire like it wasn't even there, and when we used flames, it just adapted. Healed! Tav died in that corridor for nothing." "Not for nothing," Bo-Katan said coldly, studying the limited footage Ursa's helmet had captured before the retreat. The image was grainy, but clear enough. Maul's form covered in writhing crimson organic matter, tendrils moving with independent purpose, eyes that held something beyond mere Sith corruption. "We learned what we're facing. Knowledge is never worthless." "Knowledge?" The surviving night owl removed his helmet, revealing a young face aged by recent trauma. "We learned we're completely outmatched. That thing isn't just Maul anymore. It's something worse, something that shouldn't exist." Bo-Katan forced herself to watch the footage again, analyzing every detail with the tactical mind that had kept her alive through years of warfare. The creature's movements were too fluid, too adaptive. Standard combat doctrine assumed opponents followed certain physical limitations, reaction times, movement patterns, vulnerability to sustained fire. This entity operated outside those assumptions. "The ancient vaults," she said suddenly, her mind racing through half-remembered legends. When Mandalorians fought the Jedi during the Old Republic Wars, they developed specialized weapons, sonic disruptors, neural disruptors, things designed to bypass Force defenses. "You're talking about weapons that have been sealed for centuries," Ursa protested. "Most of them were destroyed or lost. And even if we could find them, what makes you think they'd work against whatever Maul has become?" "Because we have no other options." Bo-Katan's voice carried the weight of absolute certainty born from desperation. "Conventional weapons failed. We need unconventional solutions. There's a vault beneath the old Mandalorian Royal Academy. Pre Vizsla's ancestors sealed weapons there that were deemed too dangerous even for Death Watch. If we're going to have any chance of stopping Maul, we need those weapons." Before anyone could respond, the safe house's perimeter alarm shrieked. External cameras showed Death Watch patrols surrounding the building, at least 30 warriors in full combat armor. But leading them was something else. A figure in crimson and black that moved with predatory purpose, its form shifting and flowing in ways that defied anatomy. "He found us," Ursa whispered, her voice hollow with dread. "How did he find us?" Bo-Katan's mind supplied the answer with cold certainty. The wounded night owl in the palace. Maul must have extracted the information before killing him, or perhaps tracked their communications, or simply used the Force to hunt them down. The method didn't matter. What mattered was survival. "Everyone out! Now! Emergency protocols!" She grabbed her helmet, sealed it in place, and triggered the safe house's self-destruct sequence, a 30-second countdown that would incinerate everything inside. "Split up. Scatter across the city. Rendezvous point Beta in 6 hours." The Mandalorians moved with disciplined efficiency, each warrior heading for different exits as the countdown ticked away. Bo-Katan was the last to leave, pausing at the doorway to look back at the strategy table, at the frozen image of what Maul had become. Outside, she heard the first sounds of combat. Blaster fire, screams cut short, the wet tearing sounds of symbiote blades finding flesh. The hybrid wasn't trying to capture them. It was hunting them, savoring each kill, demonstrating the futility of resistance. Bo-Katan ignited her jetpack and shot skyward just as the safe house exploded behind her, fire and debris filling the night. Below, she caught one glimpse of the crimson entity standing amid the flames, its head tilted upward, tracking her flight path with eyes that promised this was far from over. She flew toward the old Royal Academy, toward weapons that might give them a fighting chance. But deep in her warrior's heart, she wondered if any weapon forged by Mandalorian hands could stop what Maul had become. A fusion of Sith darkness and something utterly alien to their galaxy. Behind her, Sundari burned, and the screaming had only just begun. Obi-Wan Kenobi's diplomatic cruiser dropped out of hyperspace at Mandalore's outer marker, and immediately every sensor aboard screamed warnings. The Jedi Master leaned forward in his seat, studying the tactical display with growing unease. Sundari's orbital defense platforms were active but unresponsive to hails, automated systems running without organic oversight. No traffic control, no customs checks, no communication of any kind from the planet's surface. "Master Kenobi, we're detecting unusual atmospheric disturbances over the capital city," reported his pilot, a clone commander named Cody who had served with him since Geonosis. "Energy signatures consistent with... well, sir, they're consistent with nothing in our database. Whatever's happening down there, it's not Republic, not Separatist, not anything we've encountered." Obi-Wan closed his eyes, extending his awareness through the Force toward the planet below. What rushed back made him physically recoil. The dark side presence was expected. Maul had always radiated malevolence like heat from a sun. But woven through that darkness was something else entirely. Something that felt wrong in a way that transcended morality or philosophy. It was as if the Force itself was recoiling from a foreign presence, an infection in the galaxy's spiritual fabric. "Take us down, Commander. Landing Platform 7. It's outside the Palace District. Gives us room to maneuver if this is a trap." Which it almost certainly was. Maul knew he would come eventually. The Zabrak's obsession with him had guaranteed it from the moment Obi-Wan cut him in half on Naboo all those years ago. The cruiser descended through Mandalore's atmosphere, and as they broke through the cloud layer, Sundari came into view. The city looked intact from altitude. No obvious battle damage, no smoking ruins. But the streets were empty. No speeders, no pedestrians, no signs of the thriving urban center that should have existed. It was as if the entire population had simply vanished. They landed on the designated platform, and Obi-Wan descended the ramp with his hand resting casually near his lightsaber. The air smelled wrong, a metallic tang mixed with something organic and rotten, like meat left too long in the sun. His small security detachment of clone troopers formed a defensive perimeter, their weapons sweeping the empty plaza. "Sir, I'm detecting life signs," Cody reported, studying his scanner. "Multiple signatures in the lower city. They're clustered together. Hiding, maybe? Or imprisoned," Obi-Wan murmured. He reached out through the Force again, touching the minds of Sundari's terrified citizens. They huddled in their homes, behind locked doors and sealed windows, praying that the monster prowling their streets wouldn't notice them. Monster. That was the word echoing through dozens of minds. Not tyrant, not conqueror, monster. A figure emerged from the shadows at the plaza's far end, moving with a gait that was almost casual but carried an undercurrent of predatory awareness. Obi-Wan's hand moved to his lightsaber hilt as the figure stepped into the dim light cast by the platform's landing beacons. It was Maul, but also not. The Zabrak's distinctive horns and facial tattoos remained recognizable. But his body was encased in writhing crimson organic matter that pulsed with its own heartbeat. Tendrils extended from his shoulders and spine, moving like serpents tasting the air. When he smiled, his teeth were too numerous, too sharp, arranged in rows that belonged to no sentient species Obi-Wan had ever encountered. "Kenobi!" The hybrid's voice carried harmonics that made Obi-Wan's skin crawl. Multiple tones layered over each other in a chorus of malevolence. "I knew you would come. Your compassion makes you predictable. Your attachment to the past makes you weak." The clone troopers opened fire without waiting for orders, their training overriding shock at the sight before them. Blaster bolts streaked across the plaza in a disciplined barrage. The entity didn't dodge. It simply stood there as symbiote matter hardened into shields that absorbed the energy, dissipating it across its surface like water across stone. "Cease fire!" Obi-Wan commanded, igniting his lightsaber. The blue blade hummed to life, casting its steady glow across the plaza. "Maul, what have you done to yourself? What is that thing wearing your body?" Inside the fusion, Maul's consciousness surged forward, asserting control over their shared voice. "I have evolved, Kenobi. Power beyond your Jedi dogma, beyond your pathetic philosophy of balance. I am more than Sith now. I am perfection. The union of dark side mastery, and something your small mind cannot begin to comprehend." The symbiote reveled in Kenobi's presence, tasting the fear and revulsion radiating from him despite his Jedi training. This was prey of a different quality, powerful, skilled, dangerous. The kind of prey that made victory sweeter. Obi-Wan fell into Soresu stance, his defensive form honed through years of warfare. "Whatever you've become, I will stop you. For Mandalore, for Satine, for every innocent life you've destroyed." "Satine," the hybrid purred, taking a step forward. Tendrils extended from its back, spreading like a crimson peacock's display. "Her death was the least of my gifts to this world. Would you like to see what else I've accomplished, old enemy?" Would you like to witness what happens when something beyond your force touches this galaxy? The entity lunged with speed that defied prediction, covering the plaza's distance in a heartbeat. Obi-Wan's lightsaber rose to meet the attack, but instead of Maul's double-bladed weapon, he faced dozens of hardened symbiote blades erupting from the hybrid's arms, shoulders, and spine. Each blade struck from a different angle, creating a storm of attacks that overwhelmed even Soresu's defensive perfection. Obi-Wan gave ground, his blade moving in precise arcs to deflect the onslaught, but for every blade he blocked, 2 more sprouted from the entity's body. This wasn't lightsaber combat. This was fighting a creature that could weaponize every part of itself, that held no fixed form, no predictable attack pattern. A tendril slipped past his guard, wrapping around his ankle. Obi-Wan felt crushing pressure as it yanked his leg out from under him. He hit the ground hard, his lightsaber flying from his grip. The clone troopers rushed forward, but more tendrils erupted from the hybrid's body, catching them mid-stride, lifting them off their feet. The entity stood over Obi-Wan, its face splitting into that too wide smile. "You cannot win, Kenobi. Your force cannot predict what operates outside its laws. Your blade cannot cut what regenerates faster than you can strike. You are obsolete. Your entire order is obsolete." Deep within the fusion, Maul felt triumph surging through both consciousnesses. Finally, after all these years, Kenobi lay helpless before him. The man who had destroyed his body, who had stolen his revenge against Qui-Gon, who represented everything Maul hated about the Jedi Order. The symbiote wanted to tear him apart slowly, to savor every scream. Maul wanted something else. He wanted Kenobi to understand, to witness the full scope of what he had become before the end. But before the killing blow could fall, a rocket screamed across the plaza and detonated against the hybrid's torso, sending it staggering backward in a bloom of fire and shrapnel. Bo-Katan Kryze descended from the sky on jetpack thrust, her armor scorched and damaged, but her weapons very much functional. Behind her came a dozen Mandalorian warriors, and in their hands they carried weapons that hummed with frequencies that made the symbiote recoil in instinctive fear. "Get up, Jedi!" Bo-Katan snapped, landing between Obi-Wan and the recovering hybrid. "If we're going to kill this abomination, we do it together!" The sonic disruptors hummed with frequencies that existed at the edge of organic hearing, weapons pulled from vaults that hadn't been opened in 3 centuries. Bo-Katan's Mandalorians formed a defensive line, their ancient weapons aimed at the hybrid entity that was already regenerating from the rocket blast. Obi-Wan pulled himself to his feet, using the Force to summon his lightsaber back to his hand, acutely aware that he'd just been saved by the woman whose sister he'd failed to protect. "These weapons were designed to kill Jedi," Bo-Katan said without looking at him, her attention fixed on the crimson nightmare before them. "Let's hope they work on whatever Maul has become." The hybrid's form rippled and shifted as it regenerated, but something was different now. The symbiote recoiled from the sonic frequencies, its cellular structure vibrating in painful resonance. Inside the fusion, the alien entity screamed in a language that predated words, demanding retreat, demanding escape from this agonizing sound. But Maul's consciousness held firm, forcing the symbiote to endure, to adapt, to overcome. "Pain is a teacher," the hybrid hissed through gritted teeth, its voice strained. "And I am an excellent student." The Mandalorians opened fire. Sonic waves invisible to the naked eye struck the entity's organic armor, causing it to bubble and split. The symbiote matter tried to harden into shields as it had against blaster fire, but the vibrations passed through solid matter, attacking the creature at a cellular level. For the first time since the fusion, the hybrid staggered backward, tendrils thrashing in agony. Obi-Wan seized the opening. He launched himself forward, lightsaber blazing, and drove the plasma blade toward the entity's chest. The strike should have been killing, a clean thrust through the heart. But the symbiote shifted Maul's organs at the last second, moving vital tissue away from the blade's path. The lightsaber pierced through, cauterizing as it went, but the wound closed almost as quickly as it opened. "You'll have to do better than that, Kenobi!" The hybrid's arm morphed into a massive blade that swept horizontally with enough force to decapitate. Obi-Wan ducked beneath it, feeling the displaced air ruffle his hair, and came up inside the entity's guard. His blade flashed in a series of precision strikes, Soresu's defensive form shifting into Ataru's aggressive assault. Each strike landed true, burning through symbiote matter, severing tendrils, carving chunks from the organic armor, but each wound healed within seconds, new tissue growing to replace what was destroyed. It was like fighting the tide itself, endless, inevitable, unstoppable. Bo-Katan's warriors maintained suppressing fire, their sonic disruptors creating a perimeter that forced the hybrid to focus on Obi-Wan rather than spreading its attacks. But even ancient Mandalorian weapons had limitations. The power cells were draining faster than expected, the weapons themselves heating up from sustained use. They had minutes at best before the disruptors overloaded. "We need to contain it!" Obi-Wan shouted, deflecting another flurry of symbiote blades. "Drive it back toward the palace! We can—" The hybrid's laugh cut him off, a sound that held both Maul's sardonic cruelty and the symbiote's alien hunger. "Contain me? You still don't understand, do you, Kenobi? I don't need to defeat you all at once. I just need to outlast you." As if to prove the point, the entity stopped fighting. It simply stood there, weathering the sonic assault and Obi-Wan's strikes, allowing itself to be wounded over and over while its regeneration worked overtime. The symbiote's healing factor was being pushed to its limit, but it was managing, adapting, learning to anticipate the attack patterns and minimize damage. Inside the fusion, Maul's tactical mind was calculating. The sonic weapons would fail soon. He could see the Mandalorians adjusting their grip as the disruptors overheated. Kenobi was tiring, his strikes fractionally slower than they'd been at the battle's start. All he needed to do was endure, and victory would come naturally. But the symbiote had a different idea. It whispered to Maul's consciousness, showing him images of what they could become together. Not just a fusion of two beings, but a spreading infection. Every Mandalorian, every clone trooper, every living being on this planet could become a host. An army of symbiote warriors, each retaining their skills and memories, but bound to a hive consciousness that answered only to them. Maul felt revulsion at the thought, but also temptation. An army that could challenge even Sidious. Power that could reshape the galaxy according to his vision. All he had to do was surrender a little more control, let the symbiote spread, accept that unity with the creature was better than struggling against it. "No," he growled, and for a moment his voice was purely his own, without the symbiote's layered tones. "I will not be a vessel for your hunger. I am Darth Maul, former Sith apprentice, and I bow to no one." The internal conflict manifested externally. The hybrid's form rippled violently, tendrils thrashing without coordination as two wills warred for dominance. Obi-Wan sensed the disturbance through the Force, felt the battle raging within his enemy's consciousness. "He's fighting it!" Obi-Wan called out. "Whatever that thing is, Maul is resisting. We need to push harder. Separate them while they're divided." Bo-Katan understood immediately. "All units, concentrated fire. Target the center mass." The Mandalorians adjusted their aim, overlapping their sonic fields to create a point of maximum disruption directly over the hybrid's chest. The symbiote screamed in agony, its matter beginning to separate from Maul's body. But then, something unexpected happened. Maul's consciousness, driven by pride and the instinct for survival, reached out through the Force and seized the symbiote's essence, not to expel it, but to dominate it completely. If he couldn't rid himself of the creature, he would bend it to his absolute will. The dark side surged through the hybrid like a tidal wave. Maul channeled every ounce of hatred, every memory of suffering, every lesson his former master had beaten into him, and he drove that dark energy into the symbiote's primitive consciousness. The creature had never encountered anything like the Force before. It was used to dominating hosts through physical superiority and psychological horror. Against a power that operated on a spiritual level, it had no defense. The fusion stabilized, but this time with Maul clearly in control. The symbiote became a tool, an extension of his will, rather than a partner in consciousness. The organic armor stopped thrashing and reformed with deliberate purpose, shaped by Maul's tactical genius rather than the creature's chaotic instincts. When the hybrid's eyes opened again, they held a clarity that was purely Zabrak, cold intelligence backed by absolute confidence. "Thank you, Kenobi," it said, in a voice that was now predominantly Maul's. "Your attack forced me to truly master this power. Now witness what a Sith Lord can accomplish with tools beyond your understanding." The entity moved with purpose born from singular will. It ignored the sonic weapons entirely, accepting the pain as irrelevant compared to victory. Tendrils shot out with surgical precision, wrapping around disruptors and crushing them like tin cans. Mandalorians fell back, reaching for conventional weapons that they knew would be useless. Obi-Wan planted himself between the hybrid and Bo-Katan's warriors, his lightsaber held in a guard position that spoke of desperate determination. "I will not let you harm them, Maul. Whatever power you've gained, I will find a way to stop you." The hybrid paused, tilting its head in a gesture that was pure Maul, calculating, considering, enjoying the moment. "You truly believe that, don't you? That's what I've always admired about you, Kenobi. Your absolute conviction in the face of impossible odds. It's also your greatest weakness." From the shadows around the plaza, more figures emerged. Death Watch warriors, dozens of them, surrounding the combined force of Jedi and Mandalorian resistance. They'd been there all along, waiting for Maul's signal, watching as their master turned his enemy's desperation into a trap. Obi-Wan felt the Force screaming a warning, but it was too late. They were surrounded, outgunned, and facing an enemy that had just achieved perfect fusion between Sith power and alien horror. He tightened his grip on his lightsaber and prepared to sell his life dearly. Then the sky above Sundari tore open with the arrival of a massive Venator-class star destroyer, and from its hangar bays poured Republic gunships carrying the 501st Legion. Anakin Skywalker's voice crackled across all frequencies, carrying his characteristic cocky confidence. "Master, I know you said not to come, but when have I ever followed orders?" The plaza erupted into chaos as Republic gunships descended through the smoke-filled sky, their door guns laying down suppressing fire that scattered the Death Watch warriors. Anakin Skywalker leaped from the lead gunship before it even touched ground, his blue lightsaber already ignited, his presence in the Force blazing with the aggressive confidence that made him both a brilliant general and a constant source of concern for the Jedi Council. "Anakin, I told you to stay on Coruscant!" Obi-Wan shouted over the sound of blaster fire, though he couldn't quite suppress the relief in his voice. "And I ignored you. You're welcome." Anakin's eyes found the hybrid entity at the plaza's center, and his expression shifted from cocky confidence to something darker. "What in the name of the Force is that?" "Maul," Obi-Wan said simply. "Or what he's become." The hybrid watched the Republic reinforcements deploy with cold calculation. Inside the fusion, Maul's consciousness processed this new development with Sith pragmatism. He could fight. The symbiote's power combined with his mastery of the dark side made him formidable enough to challenge even multiple Jedi. But victory wasn't about brute force. Victory was about achieving objectives, and his objective had never been simply killing Kenobi. It had been breaking him, making him suffer, forcing him to witness the consequences of his failures. "Skywalker," the hybrid's voice carried across the battlefield, cutting through the chaos with unnatural clarity. "The Chosen One himself! How convenient that you've delivered yourself to me!" Anakin's grip tightened on his lightsaber. "I don't know what you've turned into, Maul, but I'm putting an end to it right now." "Are you?" The entity's form shifted, tendrils retracting into its body as it adopted a more humanoid stance. "Tell me, Chosen One, can you sense what I've become through the Force? Can your precious midi-chlorians comprehend something that exists outside their natural order?" Anakin reached out through the Force, and what he felt made him physically recoil. The hybrid was a void in the Force, not absent like Yuuzhan Vong would be in another era, but wrong, like a cancer growing in healthy tissue. The dark side emanated from Maul as expected, but intertwined with it was something that the Force itself seemed to reject, an alien presence that didn't belong in this galaxy. "It's an abomination," Anakin breathed, horror creeping into his voice. "Master, that thing shouldn't exist. The Force is screaming at me to destroy it." "Then perhaps you should listen," Obi-Wan said quietly, falling into formation beside his former apprentice. Together they advanced, their lightsabers casting blue light across the scarred plaza. Behind them, Bo-Katan rallied her warriors, coordinating with the clone troopers to establish a defensive perimeter. The hybrid didn't retreat. Instead, it began to laugh, a sound that started as Maul's distinctive sardonic chuckle, but grew into something far more disturbing, layered with alien harmonics that set teeth on edge. "You think 2 Jedi are enough? Even the Chosen One and his master? Let me show you what I've truly become." The entity's form exploded outward in a storm of crimson tendrils, each one tipped with hardened blades that struck like vibroblades. Dozens of attacks came simultaneously, creating a sphere of death that expanded toward the 2 Jedi with terrifying speed. Obi-Wan and Anakin moved in perfect synchronization, their years of fighting together allowing them to anticipate each other's movements. Obi-Wan's defensive form created a wall of blue plasma that deflected attacks, while Anakin's aggressive strikes carved through tendrils, severing them before they could reach vulnerable points. But for every tendril severed, 2 more grew. The symbiote's regeneration was faster than they could damage it, and the entity's combat style held no pattern, no rhythm they could exploit. It was like fighting a living storm, chaotic, unpredictable, relentless. "We can't kill it!" Anakin shouted, his breathing already labored from the intense pace. "Every time we cut it, it just grows back." "Then we contain it," Obi-Wan replied, a desperate plan forming in his mind. "The palace throne room. We drive it back there, collapse the structure on top of it." Bo-Katan's voice cut through on their comlinks. "The throne room has reinforced durasteel supports designed to survive orbital bombardment. You'd need thermal detonators," Anakin finished, understanding immediately. "A lot of them, planted at the support columns, detonated simultaneously." "My warriors can plant them," Bo-Katan said. "But you'll need to keep that thing occupied while we work." The hybrid seemed to sense their plan through Maul's Force sensitivity. Its attacks intensified, tendrils lashing out not just at the Jedi, but at the Mandalorian warriors attempting to flank toward the palace. Clone troopers opened fire, their coordinated volleys forcing the entity to split its attention, but casualties mounted quickly. The symbiote's blades pierced armor with ease, and its regeneration made conventional weapons nearly useless. Inside the fusion, Maul felt the symbiote's hunger growing. It wanted to spread, to infect the dying clone troopers, to create spawn that would multiply their power exponentially. The temptation was overwhelming. An army of symbiote warriors could turn this battle immediately. But Maul remembered his earlier decision, his refusal to become merely a vector for the creature's reproduction. He held firm, channeling dark-side energy to suppress the symbiote's instincts. "You fight yourself as much as you fight us," Obi-Wan observed, sensing the internal struggle through the Force. "That thing inside you wants something you won't give it. You're not as much in control as you pretend, Maul." "Shut up, Kenobi!" The hybrid lunged forward, abandoning its defensive position for the first time. Maul's rage overwhelmed tactical thinking, the taunt striking deeper than any blade. His cybernetic legs, now enhanced with symbiote strength, propelled him across the plaza fast enough to create sonic booms. He crashed into Obi-Wan with enough force to send them both tumbling across the durasteel. Anakin moved to intercept, but tendrils erupted from the ground beneath him. Symbiote matter that the hybrid had seeded during the battle, waiting for this moment. They wrapped around Anakin's legs and arms, pulling him down, constricting with crushing force. His lightsaber fell from his grip as he fought against the organic bonds. Obi-Wan found himself pinned beneath the hybrid's weight, its face mere centimeters from his own. Up close, he could see the horror of the fusion. Maul's yellow eyes surrounded by too many teeth, skin that rippled with independent motion, breath that smelled of copper and rot. "I have waited so long for this moment," the hybrid whispered, its voice intimate and terrible. "To have you helpless before me. To show you that all your wisdom, all your skill, all your precious Jedi philosophy means nothing against true power." A symbiote blade formed along the entity's arm, positioning itself over Obi-Wan's heart. The Jedi Master closed his eyes, reaching out through the Force not for a weapon or defense, but for peace. If this was his end, he would face it as a Jedi should, without fear, without hate, accepting the will of the Force. But the killing blow never came. The sky split open with purple lightning as a new presence arrived, a presence that made the hybrid freeze in recognition and terror. Darth Sidious descended from his personal shuttle, his dark robes billowing around him, his aged face twisted in fury that transcended mere anger. This was the wrath of a Sith Lord who had spent decades engineering the perfect plan, only to find it threatened by an unexpected variable. "Maul." Sidious's voice was soft, almost gentle, which made it infinitely more terrifying. "My former apprentice. My failed experiment. You dare to acquire power without my permission? You dare to risk exposure of my grand design with your pathetic quest for revenge?" The hybrid released Obi-Wan and rose to face its former master, and for the first time since the fusion, those present heard genuine fear in its voice. "Master, I can explain. Explanations are for apprentices who might yet serve a purpose. You lost that privilege when you failed me on Naboo." Sidious raised his hands, and Force lightning erupted in a storm that turned night into day. "You are no longer worthy of the title Darth. You are merely a broken tool that must be destroyed before it causes more damage to my carefully laid plans." The lightning struck the hybrid with enough power to vaporize a normal being. The symbiote screamed in agony as electrical energy coursed through its cellular structure, burning it from within. But it held together, regenerating as fast as it was destroyed, creating a nightmarish equilibrium between Sidious's power and the creature's adaptability. The battle between Sith Lord and hybrid abomination transformed the plaza into a hellscape of purple lightning and crimson tendrils. Darth Sidious poured decades of accumulated dark side mastery into his assault, each bolt of Force lightning calculated to overwhelm and destroy. The symbiote absorbed the energy, channeling it through Maul's Force-sensitive cells, using the very power meant to destroy them as fuel for regeneration. It was an impossible stalemate. Sidious had unlimited reserves of hatred, but the symbiote had unlimited capacity to adapt. Obi-Wan pulled himself to his feet, using the Force to free Anakin from the symbiote tendrils that had withdrawn to defend against Sidious's assault. The two Jedi stood together, watching two monsters battle for dominance, acutely aware that whoever won would turn their attention to everyone else in the plaza. "We need to evacuate," Obi-Wan said quietly. "Get the clone troopers and Mandalorians out while those two are occupied." "And leave Sidious to win?" Anakin's voice carried frustration born from years of war. "Master, that's the Sith Lord who's been orchestrating this entire conflict. If we let him leave Mandalore, if we engage him now, we die," Obi-Wan interrupted. "Look at him, Anakin. That's not the frail Chancellor we know from Coruscant. That's a being of pure dark side power. We're not ready to face him." Bo-Katan's voice crackled through their comlinks. "Charges are planted. The throne room is rigged to collapse. But if we trigger them now, the entire palace district comes down. Thousands of civilians are sheltering in those buildings." The hybrid scream of rage cut through their deliberations. Maul's consciousness, pushed to its absolute limit, made a decision that the symbiote's survival instinct screamed against. He channeled every ounce of dark side energy he possessed, not into fighting Sidious, but into the symbiote itself, forcing the creature to detach, to separate, to release its hold on his body. The agony was indescribable. It felt like being flayed alive while conscious, every nerve ending firing simultaneously as the symbiote's tendrils withdrew from his nervous system. But Maul had spent years in madness on Lotho Minor, had survived being bisected by Kenobi, had endured torture at the hands of the Jedi. Pain was an old friend, and he wielded it like a weapon against both the symbiote and himself. "No!" The symbiote's voice emerged without Maul's, a chittering alien sound of protest and fury. "We are stronger together. We are perfection. Why do you reject?" "Because I am Sith!" Maul snarled through gritted teeth, his cybernetic legs straining as he physically tore himself away from the organic matter. "And the Sith bow to no one!" The separation wasn't clean. Chunks of symbiote matter clung to Maul's body, and portions of his flesh tore away with the creature. Both entities collapsed, weakened beyond immediate function. The crimson mass writhed on the plaza floor, trying to reform, trying to find a new host among the assembled warriors. It lunged toward the nearest clone trooper with desperate hunger. Sidious's force lightning changed targets, striking the free symbiote with concentrated fury. Without Maul's force sensitivity to channel and adapt the energy, the creature had no defense. It burned, cells rupturing at a molecular level, its alien biology unable to regenerate faster than it was being destroyed. The symbiote's death scream was a sound that would haunt nightmares, a frequency that existed between dimensions, the cry of something that should never have entered this galaxy. In seconds, nothing remained but ashes and the lingering scent of ozone and burnt organic matter. Maul lay gasping on the durasteel, his body a ruin of exposed muscle and damaged cybernetics. But his eyes held clarity they hadn't possessed since the fusion, pure Zabrak hatred, undiluted by alien influence. He looked up at his former master with defiance that death itself couldn't diminish. "You waited," Maul rasped. "You let it weaken me before intervening. You always were a coward, hiding behind manipulation." Sidious smiled, an expression more terrifying than any rage. "I am pragmatic, my failed apprentice. Why expend effort when your enemies destroy each other?" He raised his hand for the killing blow, lightning already crackling at his fingertips. "Now!" Bo-Katan's voice echoed across the plaza, and the thermal detonators planted throughout the palace district detonated simultaneously. The explosions weren't aimed at Sidious or Maul directly. That would have been suicide. Instead, they brought down the massive structures surrounding the plaza, creating an avalanche of durasteel and transparasteel that rained down on everyone present. The Jedi and Mandalorians had known this was coming, had positioned themselves near cover and escape routes. Sidious had not. The Dark Lord's expression shifted from triumph to fury as tons of debris fell toward him. He caught most of it with the Force, creating a protective bubble, but the sheer mass was overwhelming even for his power. He was forced to retreat, using force speed to blur backward toward his shuttle, his attention divided between escape and catching falling debris that would otherwise crush his transport. In those crucial seconds, Obi-Wan made a choice that would define the moment. He could pursue Sidious, could try to capture or kill the Sith Lord while he was distracted, or he could save the wounded warriors, Jedi, clone troopers, and Mandalorians alike, who were directly in the collapse path. The choice was never really a choice at all. Obi-Wan was a Jedi, and Jedi protected life above all else. He and Anakin combined their powers, creating a force barrier that deflected the worst of the debris away from the evacuation zone. Gunships swooped in, their crews grabbing wounded and pulling them aboard with desperate speed. Bo-Katan's Mandalorians used their jetpacks to carry those who couldn't walk, prioritizing injured clones who had fought beside them despite old animosities. Sidious's shuttle launched skyward, the Dark Lord's presence in the Force radiating frustrated rage. He would have his revenge for this interference, but not today. Not when the collapse threatened to expose him to witnesses he couldn't immediately silence. The Sith dealt in shadows, and this had become too public, too visible. As the dust settled, Obi-Wan realized that Maul's body was gone. The Zabrak had somehow found strength to crawl away during the chaos, disappearing into Sundari's ruined streets, wounded, separated from the symbiote that had granted him terrible power, but alive. Always surviving, always returning to haunt them another day. The Battle of Mandalore was over, but no one present felt like they had won. 3 days later, Sundari began the process of rebuilding. Republic engineers worked alongside Mandalorian construction crews, clearing debris and restoring basic services. The civilian population emerged from hiding, shocked to discover that their imprisonment had lasted less than 48 hours. It had felt like a lifetime. Bo-Katan stood in what remained of the throne room, looking at the empty seat where Maul had ruled. She had fought to free Mandalore from his tyranny, and technically she had succeeded. But the cost had been written in blood across her homeworld streets, and Maul was still out there somewhere, wounded and weakened but never to be underestimated. Obi-Wan found her there, his robe still stained with ash from the battle. "The Republic is withdrawing most forces," he said quietly. "We're leaving a small garrison to help with security, but Mandalore's future is for Mandalorians to decide." "Some freedom," Bo-Katan replied bitterly. "We trade one occupier for another." "We're not occupiers. We're—" Obi-Wan paused, searching for words that wouldn't sound like empty platitudes. "We're trying to help. By keeping us under your protection? By making us dependent on Republic forces?" She turned to face him, and he saw the weight of leadership already settling on her shoulders. "I'll accept your help, Kenobi. Because I'm pragmatic enough to know we need it. But Mandalore will be free again, truly free. Not ruled by Sith lords or crime syndicates or Republic interests, just Mandalorians, following our own path." Obi-Wan nodded slowly. "That's all any of us can hope for. The freedom to choose our own destiny." In the rebuilt medical facility, Anakin sat beside the bed of a clone trooper who had lost both legs to a symbiote blade. The trooper, designated CT-7831, would receive prosthetics, would continue serving if he chose, but his life had been irrevocably changed by something that shouldn't have existed in their galaxy. "General Skywalker," the clone said quietly. "What was that thing? Really?" Anakin had no good answer. He'd consulted the Jedi archives, had searched through every record of dark side experiments and Sith alchemy. Nothing matched what they'd witnessed. The symbiote had been alien in the truest sense, something from beyond their understanding of biology and physics, something that the Force itself seemed to reject. "I don't know," he admitted. "But it's gone now. We made sure of that." The clone nodded, accepting the answer because what else could he do? But Anakin felt the lie in his words. Was the symbiote truly gone? Or had fragments survived, microscopic pieces hiding in Mandalore's sewers or clinging to debris? The creature had demonstrated impossible regeneration. What if a single cell was enough? These thoughts would plague him in the nights to come, joining all the other nightmares that the Clone Wars had gifted him. Across the galaxy on a forgotten moon in the Outer Rim, Darth Maul dragged himself into a cave that stank of decay and abandonment. His body was failing, his cybernetic legs damaged beyond simple repair, his flesh still bearing wounds from the separation. He should be dead. By all rights, the injuries should have killed him. But Maul had always been too stubborn to die. He settled against the cave wall, his breathing labored, his yellow eyes staring into the darkness. The symbiote was gone, destroyed by Sidious's lightning. But the memory remained. The taste of absolute power, the fusion of dark side mastery and alien strength, the sensation of being more than he had ever been alone. "I will find you again," he whispered to the void, though whether he spoke to the symbiote's ghost or to himself, even he couldn't say. "I will recreate what we were. I will become perfect." But deep in his damaged psyche, a fragment of truth whispered back. The symbiote hadn't made him stronger. It had made him dependent. It had taken his Sith discipline and twisted it into something chaotic, uncontrolled. He had been stronger when he finally rejected it, when he chose pain and weakness over corrupted power. That truth would take years to fully accept. For now, he had only rage and the burning need for revenge against everyone who had witnessed his failure. Kenobi, Sidious, Bo-Katan, and most of all, himself. The cave sealed behind him as he succumbed to unconsciousness, and Mandalore's nightmare finally, truly ended. The galaxy would remember the siege of Mandalore as a footnote in the Clone Wars. A brief Sith occupation ended by combined Jedi and Mandalorian forces. Official Republic records made no mention of the crimson horror that had stalked Sundari's streets, of the alien symbiote that had fused with Darth Maul and transformed him into something beyond Sith or sentient comprehension. Those details were classified, buried in archives so deep that only the Jedi Council and the highest levels of Republic intelligence knew the full truth. But the warriors who had been there, clone troopers, Mandalorians, and Jedi alike, carried the memory like a scar. They had witnessed something that defied the natural order, a fusion of dark side power and extra-universal horror that proved the galaxy held threats beyond their understanding. In cantinas and barracks across known space, they whispered stories of the Red Devil of Mandalore, the monster that wore a Sith Lord's face and wielded weapons grown from its own nightmarish flesh. Bo-Katan took control of Mandalore with the reluctant support of the Republic and the grudging acceptance of the Mandalorian clans. She ruled with the steel forged from watching her world nearly consumed by darkness, never forgetting that evil came in forms both familiar and utterly alien. The sonic disruptors were returned to their vaults, but she kept the access codes close. Some weapons were too dangerous to use, until they became necessary for survival. Obi-Wan Kenobi returned to the war, carrying questions that meditation couldn't fully answer. The Force had recoiled from the symbiote as if rejecting a cancer. Yet it had also allowed the creature to exist, to bond with a Force-sensitive host. What did that mean for the cosmic balance the Jedi claimed to serve? Were there threats emerging that the ancient order was unprepared to face? These doubts would haunt him through the Clone Wars and beyond, adding weight to the burden he already carried. Anakin Skywalker felt the encounter with Carnage Maul differently. He had sensed the symbiote's hunger, its desire to spread and consume, and part of him had recognized something familiar in that endless need for more power. The thought terrified him in ways he couldn't articulate, couldn't confess even to Padme. What separated righteous strength from corrupting hunger? How thin was the line between using power and being used by it? These questions would echo through his choices in the terrible days ahead. Darth Sidious filed the incident away as an unfortunate complication, but ultimately a useful lesson. His former apprentice had accessed power beyond Sith teachings and been destroyed by it, proof that strength without wisdom led only to ruin. Yet the Emperor who would emerge from the Clone Wars kept extensive files on the symbiote phenomenon, on the dimensional rift that had allowed it entry, on the possibility that other such entities might exist in the vast, unexplored regions beyond known space. Knowledge was power, and even abominations had their uses in the right circumstances. And somewhere in the unknown regions, Darth Maul healed in self-imposed exile. His body recovered slowly, augmented by dark side techniques and the Zabraki natural resilience that had allowed him to survive bisection. But his mind never fully healed from the fusion. In his dreams, he still felt the symbiote's presence, the intoxicating rush of limitless regeneration, the terrible freedom of absolute violence unbound by strategy or restraint. He told himself he had rejected that power, that he had proven his Sith superiority by casting out the alien corruption. But late at night, when darkness was complete and truth unavoidable, he wondered, had he expelled the symbiote, or had it simply withdrawn, waiting for a moment of weakness to return? And worse, did part of him want it to return, to feel that terrible completeness one more time? The rift that had delivered Carnage to the Star Wars galaxy sealed itself, cosmic forces rejecting the wound in reality. But rifts, once opened, leave scars. In the Force itself, a tiny fracture remained, imperceptible to all but the most sensitive practitioners, a hairline crack in the barrier between dimensions. The symbiote was gone, destroyed by Sidious's lightning down to its last cell. But in the infinite expanse of the multiverse, other symbiotes existed, other entities of hunger and chaos that drifted through the cosmic void, drawn to worlds saturated with violence and darkness. Mandalore's rift had closed, but the galaxy far, far away had been marked, noticed by things that dwelt in spaces between universes. For now, the threat had passed. The nightmare was over. Mandalore would rebuild, the Clone Wars would continue, and the galaxy would turn its attention to more immediate crises. But some doors, once opened, can never be completely closed, and some hungers, once awakened, never truly die. The Force would remember what happened when Carnage possessed Darth Maul, and it would remain vigilant, because the next time something alien breached their reality, the consequences might be far worse than even Sidious could control. If you loved this dark fusion of Star Wars and cosmic horror, subscribe to the channel for more crossover stories that explore what happens when the galaxy far, far away meets powers from beyond the stars. Drop a comment with the character you want to see enter the Star Wars universe next. Every suggestion shapes the stories to come. May the Force be with you, and may the darkness never fully claim us. May the Force be with you. More stories await.